Hello everybody, it's Chris Schmidt from Rocket Lasso, and we've got tutorial number 3 for Tutorial Tuesday. I'm excited about this one. It originally began as a question in the main live stream, which, by the way, super important note is I transferred all of the replays of the live streams to a new channel. The link will be in the description below. So if you like seeing the replays of the live streams, head on over and subscribe to that channel as well. This channel is going to be just for announcements and tutorials moving forward. So that's an important additional detail. But in this video, we're going to be tackling ferrofluids. Ferrofluids are a lot of fun. Like I said, it started as a question in a live stream, but we did a setup using dynamics and it was really neat and it worked better than I thought it would, but very quickly we ran into limitations. So I kept on exploring and eventually we got a really nice technique that is what I'm going to be showing you right now. So jump over to the screen, and just real quick, an important thing to do on anything you're working on is look up some reference. So I just went to YouTube, searched for ferrofluid, and there's lots of different videos, different ways of making it for real, lots of fun ones. But eventually, the one that I really liked the look of was this Bob Products one, and I'll have a link below for this as well. And it just has a just really great display, and the lighting's really nice, and it's pretty much what we're aiming for. And you can see it's kind of on a flat plane, and we can see how the shapes are forming and how the different spikes look, how it all moves around and blobs. Just really fun reference. So essentially, this is what we're targeting, but we're going to be doing it in a motion graphics type of way. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D S22, because we're going to be using fields, a lot of fields. The only thing I've prepped beforehand is I have a sky object, and the sky object is holding an HDR, and that's just because I wanted to change the default HDR. Even if you don't have an HDR, then the default one will load in. It'll look just fine. This just gave me a little bit higher contrast. But I don't want to see the HDR in the background, so something that's pretty cool is on the sky, I can add the Cinema 4D render compositing tag, and if we turn off scene by camera, not only does that affect the final render, it also shows, turns it off in the viewport, which is excellent. Now, this technique can be applied to a lot of different things. We can put it onto a logo, we can put it onto a plane, kind of any geometry, any shape. But we're going to start on the more complicated one, I believe, of text, because, everybody needs text. So beginning with a motext, keep it simple. I don't want to have too many letters because we'll be throwing a lot of geometry in. I want to do this kind of in real time. I'll type in a nice C4D, gives us 3 letters, lots of detail. I want to change the font to something a little bit chunkier here. So I'm going to scroll up to just a font I like using all the time because it's the official font of Rocket Lasso, and it's going to be a nice Futura. I'm going to use Futura PT Bold because it's very chunky, you get some sharp angles, but I just like the way it looks overall. Okay, we got this C4D, and one of the main things we're going to be doing is we want to get very even polygons on everything. So a very even distribution of polygons, a whole big grid of them. Now, if we hit NB, you're going to see the polygons. You see right now, very much it is not evenly subdivided. So we could put a lot of work into changing the caps, and we got different modes where we could subdivide things in different ways. It could be good, but I think this is actually an excellent opportunity to use the new-ish volumes inside of Cinema. So if we create a volume builder and immediately a volume mesher, drop our motext into the builder, drop the builder into the mesher, we can see some final geometry. What's great about the volumes is it creates pretty much I think it is all quads. These are all 4-sided polygons, and they're all very, very similar in size. So that gives us a really, really good starting point. Now, to increase our resolution here, we need to decrease our voxel size. I'll drop it down to about half, let's say 5. Actually, that's pretty nice. I'm surprised at how clean that is in general. If you want to have more control over it, you can always, we can increase it here. We can put smoothing on. We could control the geometry that we're feeding into it. If we turn both our builder and mesher off for a moment, we could go into caps and turn on some sort of rounding. If these edges are a little sharp for us, something I do like doing would be to create a bevel. And this bevel will actually bevel all the edges. So you see it'll take the harshness off all of the corners, including these sharp ones, and increase this to whatever level is useful. That will be fed into the volume builder, and everything will get rounded from that point. So it's a good way of maybe taking some of these sharp corners off if those are not quite working. It's just completely up to you. Lots of different power there. In this particular case, I don't need that. Now, what's the most straightforward way of explaining the core concept here? we want to get a reasonably high poly count on this. And this is going to represent all of the spikes. So let's see, can I drop this down to 4? Yeah, that doesn't seem like too many. This seems like a pretty good count overall. So that is going to be what our spikes are generated from. I'm going to copy and paste the entire volume measure. The first one, let's name this spike reference. Spike ref. This one is final geo. Just keep it clean right from the start. The second one on top needs a lot more geometry. If these are the references for the spikes, the actual spikes need to be made of more geometry. So along those lines, changing the volume builder to something a lot denser. Let's try jumping to 2, and that's going to be quite a bit sharper. There's more, harder edges traveling around it. We could drop it even lower than this, but I think this is probably pretty good. I'm trying to decide. Maybe this first one's a little high, so I'll push that back up a little. Let's try 4.5. Yeah, just a slightly less. Although these two blob into each other. So yeah, tough call. We can put more spacing. I grab both the motexts and just add some horizontal spacing in there. Yeah, just enough to separate them. All right. So the next step is we need to create a vertex map. So here's the thought. If I'm going to make a copy of this, hold down Control as I click on the checkbox, and it's going to turn off the entire hierarchy. This one we can now make editable. Letter C, make it editable. Boom, explodes down to this geometry. Going to point mode, we can now select and create select menu and go to set vertex weight. As soon as I click on that, we can change the value to whatever we want. I'm going to say 100. It could be 0, 100. Doesn't matter there, because we're going to be controlling the entire thing with fields. So use fields, yes, that's what we want to do. Freeze, we don't need this freeze. This freeze is just remembering the current state, which I don't need it to remember the current state. What I do want it to do is have some sort of fall off. Now, this fall off could be based off of anything, but for demonstration purposes, I think a good start for us is going to be a spherical field. So pretty standard issue, create a spherical field, scoot this more towards the center of the 4. And actually, the way the text was created, you see it's pushing back from where it is, which means 0, 0, 0 is actually working really well for us. But in that case, you want this to be right on the front of the text, so it's getting full power. It's a little big, so I'm going to hit T for scale, pull it down. And we can control the fall off however we want to by clicking on the spherical field. Under remapping, we have these controls to give it full fall off, make it full power. Let's give it a nice full range of power right now. I think that's probably a good idea. Next, this is where things start getting, well, let's see what the order should be. Let's do the simple version, actually. Let's implement this immediately into our mesh. So this builder can be ignored. We can just go right into the final geometry. And what do we want to do to that? Well, I want to deform it. We can do it 2 different ways. We could deform it via a displacer, but technically the Plain Effector will calculate just a little bit quicker. So we'll use that one. Selecting that, I will make it a child of the final geometry. Let's unhide so we can see that actual geometry, temporarily hide the other one that we're just referencing. And what do we want to do with this? Well, we want first it to be a deformer. Grabbing the Plain Effector under deformer, change deformation to point, and boom, it's going to explode. It explodes for 2 reasons. First of all, it's too powerful, but secondly, the position is pushing out on Y, but Y is not what Cinema 4D considers up. Up or forward, a better way of thinking of it, is usually Z. So I'm going to go, let's put Y down to 0, and on Z, start increasing that, and you can see right there, it's starting to inflate just like a displacer would, but should calculate a little bit quicker. So we can push this kind of visually as far as we want. That seems pretty good to start out. All right, good beginning there. Now, under fall off, this is saying full power everywhere. We don't want it to be full power everywhere. What we want to do is only have power where the points of the other object are, the spike reference. In this specific case, we don't want them to be everywhere. We only want them to be where the vertex map said. So let's drag the vertex map in. The instant we drag that in, we're going to see, boom, a nice big bulge right there. That is what is spiking out. Okay, fair enough. That's working well. That is where the spike is, but we can do a really neat trick here. And that is clicking on the vertex map, it's currently coming in as nearest. Instead of nearest, let's say we want it to be an average. So it's averaging all of the points, and you see it actually flattens out a lot. But as we start decreasing our radius, and we want this to go quite small, we won't see too much. Right here, you see they're blending in really well because it's kind of blurring every one of those points. And just for reference, we can click on it. Every one of these points, it's blurring those. But see how far apart all of these different points are? So keeping that in mind, hide that, back to the plane. Keeping that in mind, as we keep on decreasing it, we are going to start shrinking it smaller than the individual points can blur to each other. And as we do, if we go to something like 2 or 3, we're going to start seeing that we can get these individual spikes shooting out. Now, it seems like we don't quite have enough geometry, and this is where I was trying to guess how much we needed. So we can either decrease what we were feeding in originally or increase our geometry on what's being deformed. So let's do that on our final geometry. Actually, on the volume builder itself, we can shrink this even further. Let's try 1.5. Ooh, okay, there we go. 1.5 is working really well. You can see that we see individual spikes now. And those spikes are, exactly where the spike reference is supposed to be. Very, very nice start. We can increase this or decrease it to whatever degree that we want. Let's push out these spikes a little bit more. It's not pushing out too far right now. That is going to be underneath parameters. So we can keep on pushing these spikes out more. Ooh, very nice. So we've got these individual spikes going. Okay, this is actually a really, really good start. Let's make a material so we can view this a little bit more as ferrofluid. It's not too complicated to make. Of course, there's a good chance you're using third-party renderers, but let's just make it so it looks good in the viewport with vanilla cinema materials. So I can double click in the material manager. Inside of this new material, I shall double click it to pop open this material editor. I just like this interface more than that one. We don't need color, but we do want reflectance. We have a specular. I don't want it to be specular though. I want this to be a GGX, which is just nice and shiny. I want lots of reflection, but no specular. And it's very, very shiny right now. It's very rough. A little bit of roughness isn't bad. So we'll pull that down. I'm going to do it right around, 7's fine. And it's full power everywhere. So I'm thinking maybe under Fresnel, we can turn into a conductor. And a lot of this is made from powdered magnets and kind of that's like an iron. So I'm going to set it to iron just to give us a good Fresnel. All right, excellent. With that, I think we can take that material, apply it directly to our final geometry, and boom, nice and shiny. It just might be a little too reflective. So maybe we'll pull back on our total reflection, something like that. Nice. Getting these highlights nice and spiky. Now, once again, we can crank up this geometry as much as we want. The more we crank it up, the better it will look, but it will run slower. This could be down as, we can drop it down to 1, and now there's even more detail. These spikes look better. There's more information for them to look more curvy. I kind of want to leave it there, even though it's more geometry I was intentionally aiming for. It could still work quite nicely. So continuing from there, an important thing with this overall setup is going to be where everything's going to be segmented out into very, very specific parts. So we are going to have a lot of control over it. And we just have to remember where each part is being controlled from. So if I hit NA, it's going to smooth everything out. And we're not seeing the polygons anymore. And we see our spikes really nicely. And at any point, I can grab our spherical field, scoot this around, and wherever I move it, you're going to see these spikes are going to grow. Already, this is really nice. This is a good start for us to be able to just do it. You call it quits there. That looks great. We've got our spikes so they can show up wherever we want to. Of course, we're going to go further than that though. These are very powerful and they just kind of have this really straightforward fall off, and they instantly appear as the sphere moves there, and they instantly disappear when the sphere moves away. So those are all things that we can independently control. Another thing that's happening is every single one of those spikes is perfectly even. They're all distributed in exactly the same way. Let's change that first. I think this trick is kind of fun for various things. I'm going to hide our final geometry, and let's go back into our spike reference. NB, so we can see our polygons. And there we go. This is what we see. And as we drag this around, we're just changing this vertex map. That's all we're doing so far. Let's actually deform this geometry, though. Let's change what we're feeding into the vertex map. My main thought here is, what if we kind of do this a little bit of like a black hole effect? If everything's getting sucked towards the center of the spherical field, it's actually pretty straightforward to put together. Creating a deformer, specifically a spherical deformer or spherified deformer, put that inside of the spike reference. It's going to look a little bit crazy in the beginning. It's going to look even crazier in a second. Actually, for a moment, let's put it inside the spherical field. Hit reset PSR so it zeroes out, and then pull it back out again. So now it's deforming. It's going to look super crazy. It's looking super crazy because if we zoom out, it's trying to set everything to a radius of 200. If we crank the strength up, boom, it's turning into a sphere effectively. I don't want it to be creating a sphere. I want it to be creating, well, I guess it is a sphere, but a sphere of 0, radius 0. Everything's getting pulled into 0. Perfect black hole. Can't really see too much of an effect though, because it's full power everywhere. So we can go into fall off and drag in our spherical field and give it a fall off. And now it's pulling everything to 0, but only for the amount of power that the spherical field allows, which means if I just make the spherical field a child of the spherify, now I can move my spherify around, and everywhere I move it, everything's getting sucked into that particular position. So already this by itself, completely outside of ferrofluid, is a really neat effect. Just to be getting this suction black hole look. I really like that. But let's push it further. It's really straightforward right now, and it actually could be a little bit harsh on these edges. It becomes really blatant. So let's get a cleaner fall off. Clicking on the spherical field, we can change our remapping via the contour mode, changing that from none to curve. And immediately this is easing in and easing out, which means we have a little bit more power in the beginning and it fades in from the outside. So that actually can be very nice right away. In addition to that, we could pull this line down a little bit, and you can see that center point is not going to pull in quite so much. It's like full power, and I'm going to be like, okay, never quite full power. Still trying to get to a radius 0, but don't go all the way. So everything just pinches in a little bit. Now, keeping in mind that everything that we're feeding into our final geometry is based on where these points exist and how much power is applied to them via the vertex map. If we go back to that geometry, hide this one, we should be able to see now as we move our spherify that the points are actually getting pulled. I hit NA, so we just see the finals. We can actually see that all of those are getting pulled kind of towards the center. There's more of like this magnetic vibe where everything's pulling into one particular area. So right away, that by itself, I think adds a lot to it. It's a fun additional bonus effect. But let's keep going even more. It's pretty powerful right now. There, we can control the fall off and change the scale if the radius is too big. That's all very straightforward. But let's get a little bit of extra overlap going, a little bit of bonus motion. I think something that might be nice right now would be grabbing my spherify and getting some random movement going. We'd also keyframe it, but I'm just going to add a animation vibrate tag. Turn on a position, and this is going to push on Y and X. So here's X. That's fine. I'm not sure how big this text is. I'll say 200 and go up and down Y 100. It's going to be really fast. So I'm going to set down to 0.5. So just by doing that, let's hit play and see how quickly this is moving. And if it goes far enough, right now it's sticking around on the 4. I'm going to change the amplitude to 400. So now it should want to go wider on X. Yeah, it seems better, but now it's really quick. Drop that down to 0.25. Your mileage may vary, so change that to whatever seems to work well for you. But now we can get a quick preview of some nice motion happening right out of the gate. So very nice layering up of this motion, but maybe we want this to echo a little bit. Maybe it should stick around for a little while. Along those lines, I'm thinking in the spherify, what if we were to, actually, I'm not even sure what this will do. Let's try putting a decay on there. The decay, remember, the decay remembers what happened in a particular spot. So if I were to crank that up really high, you can see now that these points that were left behind are stretching still to get to that 0 point. They're actually remembering where that was. So that's kind of interesting. I like that, but I think we want to use a light touch on that. We don't want these to lag too far behind. But a little bit of extra motion on that, I think, goes a long way. In addition, why don't we try adding a little bit of springiness? We can get springiness via the modifier layer delay. Currently it's on smooth. It's just going to smooth out the motion, which could be something you want. But in this case, use a spring. If it's going to spring, you can see right now we get all this extra motion, but there's kind of like a clampiness to it. You can see it snapping and hitting a wall really hard. That's because this is actually clamped. It's going from 0 to 100, which means it can't go negative. We can fix that just via turning off this clamp setting right there. Turn off clamp, and now immediately we're going to get an effect that is very reminiscent of the Jiggle deformer, except it doesn't have to remember that. It's just remembering what point is getting how much power applied via the spherical field. So it actually calculates a lot quicker than I think the Jiggle deformer would. So we get this jiggliness as everything gets pulled in, and then also wobbles out as it goes. And thanks to our delay, or our decay, it's also remembering a longer tail on it as well. So I like the way that has layered up there. Let's keep that in mind and how this is working. Hide the spike reference, and we'll look at our final NA, so we can just see the final, and let's see what we got here. With those overlapping and springing a little bit, we're getting a bit more of a liquidy vibe to it. There's more motion, there's more layering on it, and I think that's where a lot of the fun of this effect can come in. Now that's starting to look pretty good, why don't we try pushing things a little bit further? I think perhaps I want these to spike out further, so under the plane, let's push these more. Spike them out some more. Yeah, that's nice. Get these big spikes going. In addition, right now they're just spiking straight out as spikes, and that could be good enough. But something I think looks nice is under fall off, we can feed this kind of anything we want. In this case, I'm going to feed it the spherical field again. So spherical field, boom. This is going to override everything, but you see it's bulging out this entire shape everywhere. I like that. Why don't we say add? So there's actually the spikes and that bulge coming out. Now that's too much, but as we pull back the power on this, pull back on the opacity, we can have everything bulge out a little bit, almost like the magnet is pulling on everything just a bit. And that should, just let that stack up a little bit more and get a little bit more power on the overall shape. And I really like, especially when it hit that corner right there. Let's rewind and see if we can see it again. The way it's pulling on that corner, I just really love that layered effect. So now there is a bit of a push and pull here. We have to be careful about how far we push some of these effects. And I'll show you what I mean. Especially you can see it right here when it grabs the 4 and it moves into the spot. See how it's kind of missing these outer parts? Well, it's missing those because keep in mind that the points that we're feeding it to reference, they're actually very small. The specific one is only looking for a radius of 3. So if any point gets more than 3 units away from the surface, it just can't see it. So keeping that in mind, on this original geometry, if we start deforming it too far, if these bulge in a lot, it pulls them away from the surface and we just won't see too much of the effect. So you do have to do a judgment call of how much power do you want this to have, how much jiggle and overlap and overshoot. These can look really fun and jiggly and liquidy, but if you push it too far, it's going to move it away from the surface. There are potentially things you can do to fix it. One idea, it might not work. In general, I don't like the way it looks, but I'm going to make a copy of our spike reference, and we don't need almost anything on it. In fact, all we need is the geometry. So I'm going to delete the spherify and the vertex tag. So we have that original geometry. Now, after our spherify, I'm going to add a second deformer, and in this case, it will be a shrink wrap. So I want whatever this deformed spherify is doing, I want it then to get shrink wrapped onto what? I want it to shrink wrap onto its original mesh undeformed. Now, it might look a little bit jumpy, but let's hit play. And now I hid the one that's not moving, and now we're just seeing this final. Now, the result of this is you can see we're getting these really nice wobbles on the surface, but they're constantly being stuck on the surface of it. Now, the only part that might look weird is if it pulls far enough away, it'll try and jump to a different mesh, and that can maybe not look so great. Actually, I'm not even sure what that looks like when it translates to the final mesh. So let's see if that jump is bad or not. So as this moves, does a spike like that? I mean, you see it looks a lot nicer here where these spikes are everywhere on it. I do like that, but let's just see as it travels around, does that create any kind of jumping? I feel like maybe over here you see we get some random spikes in some places that maybe they shouldn't exist. So that could be, yeah, up there. I think that's the result of that. So that's the downside of that, but it's an additional cool thing to keep in mind. I'm going to turn it off because I don't want to use it, but yeah, it's a neat additional thing. Now, there's an important thing on this overall setup is I'm kind of talking about the different ingredients that you'll be able to use, and I mean, sure, ferrofluid has a very precise way that it moves, but artistically, we actually have a lot of controls over the way this is going to move, and we haven't even hit all of them yet. And at any given point, we can go and make more and more changes. Now, the way this geometry looks, it's very hard-edged. I think that the spikes are going to look better if the edges are more curved. So actually, in this volume builder, I'm going to add in a nice little smooth on top of it, and it's going to smooth all this text. That should only have to calculate on the first frame. We get these nice rounded letters. I think it makes it look instantly more liquidy, and these spikes should be able to look better on the corners. And also recall, I mean, it's going to run slower the more we do it, but oh yeah, that already looks better. Yeah, very nice. We can always increase the resolution, but yeah, just the way these are pulling around now, and they can travel the corners and the curves, I think that's a significantly better improvement, and we get these nice highlights now. All right, quite pleased with that overall. Now, what are some additional things we can do? Well, our vertex map is currently just traveling. It's in very specific spots. Let's take a look at it. It's only applying to these very specific spots, but actually these are wobbling for a while after the vertex map moves away. And that's because the Spherify itself has these really nice decays and delays, but our vertex map is just where the sphere is. So why don't we try adding some of those effects to that as well? But the first one, let's use a decay. At full power, well, I'll crank it up to full power so we see it. What this will enable us to do is wherever the spherical field travels, it's going to remember it at full power, and those spikes will remain forever. I don't think we want them to remain forever. We want them to fade away. In addition to that, I'm going to turn that off. In addition, we can use a delay again, set to spring, and depending on the power we have here, this can spring the value up and then down and then up and then down. Now, this one's going to be more subtle because we're moving slowly, but this could also be creating like a more of an echoey up and down, up and down, up and down effect. So it's going to be hard to tell how much of an effect that these are happening, or how much of an effect these are having while we're looking at this vertex map. So we know what these are controlling, but let's control them while we're looking at our final here. So we'll do one at a time. Let's turn on our decay. And if it's at full power, you see that these spikes will remember forever where they are, which could be cool. Maybe you want that to happen. You want these spikes to remember and then slowly get revealed as they get more and more and more. Personally, that's too much for me. So I'm going to lower this down. Let's try about 50. And what I'm hoping for is we just get a little bit of a tail on these. They can remember. Actually, it's still fading away relatively quickly, so I'm going to jump it up higher. Let these pull out more. Waiting for a point where it's moving a little bit quicker. Actually traveling more. Tell you the truth, I'm not digging this random vibration seed, so I'm going to change the seed. That's going to be completely different new movement. Hopefully it's something that works a little bit better for us. And yeah, you see these get left behind, but they don't get left behind for too long, and then they do fade away. So that's working pretty well. I like that. We can add more or less of it. Next up, inside of the Vertex tag, we can play with the delay. So this is our springiness. So turning this on, let's see what kind of effect we get from that. And here we see we get a little bit of an echo happening as this moves away. It moves away, they fade out, and you see this little bit of a tail. That could be good, it could be bad. If it's too powerful, it could take away from it. But if we leave this light enough, I think it's going to give us more of a liquidy effect overall. So let's see what that's doing. Yeah, I mean, it looks really nice in various parts. Excellent. Yeah, I like that a lot. Now, I'm quite pleased with a lot of the motion that we're getting from this overall. I'm going to pull back on our amplitude just a little bit. I like the motion overall. I just think that, like I said, these are ingredients, so you have to choose your recipe. Going back to the original geometry, I feel like it's warping a little bit too much. It's remembering all of those shapes changing just a little too much. So I might pull back on the power a little bit. And in addition to pulling back on how much the overall power is getting applied, the scale could be an issue. And then we can go into the fall off of the Spherify, and we can go easier on the decay, so it doesn't remember for quite so long. And this long echo, it doesn't need to go for quite as long. Pulling back on those, maybe it won't inflate those edges quite as much. Now, our Spherify, we're actually pulling back on the power of this quite a bit, so it might be a good idea to make a second one. And we'll use this one for, this one will just be Spherical Field Spherify, but this new one will be Spike Height. And we separated those because inside of this vertex map, actually inside of the vertex map, this Spherify is getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and I don't want that to be the case. So I'm going to drag this in and say full power. So those have now been separated into two separate ones, and they're still both traveling wherever the Spherical goes, which is wherever the Vibrate Tag goes. All right, excellent. Hide that. Let's see what the result of that effect is. All right, so this isn't bulging quite as far away as these move around. I think we end up with nice extra parts on those edges. I will say that the maybe that scaling bulge, the second Spherify that I added, that's maybe a little powerful. Because I want independent control over it, I'm going to drag in our spike height to replace it. You put this name directly over this one, then it will replace it. It's still a little much. I'm going to pull back further on there so we can still get a little bit of that bulge, but I don't want it to be so much that it super inflates. Excellent. Yeah. Okay. I'm starting to really dig the way that these are layering up. One of the main final effects that we can do here is right now the Plain Effector is doing a lot of work for us, but we want to maybe add some delay or some decay onto where these spikes are appearing on this geometry. But you cannot use the delay or decay effect while this is parametric. So depending on what you're doing, it could be a little, make sure you save a copy of it. So in this case, I could say copy paste, turn off an entire hierarchy, and now holding on a control or command as you click the checkbox, it'll turn off the entire hierarchy. And with that, we can now make this editable. Just hit the letter C, that should make it editable, and the plane deformer will still be in there. If we don't do that, it won't acknowledge this change we're about to make. And the change we're going to make is adding delays and decays on this effect as well. And these will all have slightly different effects. We'll begin with a decay. Once again, let's say full power just to see what it does. And now as this moves around, you see as a spike spikes up, it remembers that at full power forever. So depending on what you're going for, that could be really cool. But it's a little strong. Let's pull this back to 55 in my case and see what this does for us. Okay, it's remembering these spikes a little bit more as it moves away. And it leaves a little bit more of a tail. Try pulling up a little bit and see what the effect does. Maybe somewhere in between would be good. I really like when this moves slowly across. When it goes quick, it could be neat, but yeah, you see a little bit of a tail is being left behind. If you like the look of that, hey, that could be good. Temporarily, I'll turn that off, and let's also play with the same springiness. So make a new delay, change it to spring. Right away, we know we want to turn off clamp because we want to be able to go in and out. So turn off clamp, and let's just see what spring by default at 50% gives us. There's definitely more of an echo here. You see this feels a little more liquidy. There's more of this echoey splash feel. Now, it is going to echo for a while. It pushes up and down. I do like that effect. Maybe it's a little powerful. We can start pulling back. Spring gets a lot weaker as you go lower. So be careful how much you pull down it. Oh, yeah, right there. Look at these nice little extra ripples we're getting on the edge. I think this is a great addition. This spring there, that's pushed this effect to a new level now from what I'm visually seeing. Yeah, I'm digging that. Okay, now let's see if we add the decay back on, if that does anything, if these two together do anything nice for us. I like that echo, but maybe it's a little strong, so I'll pull this back significantly, maybe leave a little bit of a tail for when it's moving quickly, get this nice echoey effect. Yeah, it's adding a little bit. I mean, in general, I kind of want to leave this on just for, even if I wasn't using it, I would leave it here and turn it off. Design rule I like going by, which is if you can add something, and if you add it, it's like, well, it doesn't help, but it doesn't hurt. Well, it's like, well, if it doesn't help, then get rid of it because simpler is better. So if this feels like it's adding something, then by all means leave it. And keep in mind that changing the order of operations from the decay and the delay might also add some neat and different things. So let's see if that changes. Actually, it does feel a little bit. It feels, it's just kind of more liquidy is the description I would use. So it does seem to do something. I'll crank it up even higher, the effect strength, and see what that does. What it seems to do is this echo, but then it slowly fades away. So yeah, pulling this above, actually, yeah, look at those final ripples. I actually really like that now. So I will leave it on and at a decently high percent because that feels like it fades away more. And I dig that. So yeah, this is sort of the effect that's everything here would just be personalizing it, making it your own in various ways. And keep in mind, like the Spherify is doing a lot of work, but we could turn that off. If I turn that off now, everything is spiking out, but it's very sort of geometric. You see, you don't get those wobbles happening. which could be, which for me, I think goes a long way. Seeing them kind of pull in and pull out is a important aspect of the overall effect. In addition, the distribution, I gotta say, the original geometry, I wish I had done slightly fewer. In fact, you know what? Even though I think it's working well, I'll show you. We actually kept I'm not going to use the shrink wrap, so I'll delete that. And I'm not going to use this reference, I'll delete that. We kept a copy of this original spike reference. So if I hide, actually we are hiding that. Let's hide everything and look at the original spike reference. And here that is. That is the geometry that we are feeding. But personally, I think it would look nicer if this was slightly further apart. So I'm going to decrease. Yeah, I'm going to decrease this so there's fewer polygons. We can even jump to maybe the 5.5. And now there's even fewer. So now there's not quite as much geometry. I can make another copy of that, make it editable. And once again, hide that one in case we need to go back. And this should be really simple to transfer everything. I can transfer the Spherify and be a child of that. And then we just have the Vertex Map. I'll transfer the Vertex Map. That should all automatically update. Delete the other one. Boom. That should have updated everything, as simple as that. And even though we're making something editable, that was a pretty trivial change to make. So now with our lower resolution of polygons, let's see what we get here. And essentially what this means is there's fewer spikes, but each spike is worth more detail. And yeah, as these are bigger, I feel like we're getting a slightly better resolution on them, actually significantly so. I would like to, I don't want to keep pushing it too far, but the more resolution here, the smoother those will look. And that would be really, to me, be really good. Oh, we did make it editable, so I can't increase that one without moving it. But actually, that's trivial as well. So let's do it in the same way we did it. Let's push this one a little bit further, because why not? Turn this on to 0.75. You have to be careful about going higher resolution at a certain point. Like these numbers get crazy as we go lower. But make a duplicate of that. I should probably stop this from playing. Make that editable and hide that one. And this Plain Effector is our outdated one. So delete that and just drag in our new one, the newest one, delete the old geometry. And now we have a higher resolution geometry to be to feed on here. Now you will see immediately that we're getting less frames per second, but look how nice these spikes all look now. We've got so much geometry for them to work from. At any given point, man, there's so many settings that we could tweak. If we zoom up, you can see the individual spikes. They look really nice. We could add more geometry. We can click on the plane, grab the vertex map, and shrink the radius. If I drop it to 2, I think it'll be too small. It's not bad though. It's sharper looking. It's got a sharpness to it. Let's hit play and see how that looks. Now, as they get sharper, the resolution I think has to be higher. Meanwhile, if I were to jump it up to 4, they'll be larger, but I think the overall effect will be smoother. So you got to find the balance there. We were designing it to be at 3, so I think 3 is a good place to stay, but they'll merge into each other a little bit more, be a little smoother. Honestly, actually, I don't mind it at 4. I think I'll leave it there. Yeah, I like that. Now, there's more and more layers we can put on top of this, and I want to show you transferring this to some other objects just because of how nice it is. But one thing I did want to quickly mention is we can keep on adding more layers. If we go back to our spike reference, just look at that one. This is traveling around, and this is traveling around, and we get this nice overlap from that spring, but keep in mind that we could add I haven't saved this since we started, now that I think about it. Sorry. Let me give that a quick save. Boom. We can add a jiggle. Let's add a jiggle deformer. Jiggle. Put the jiggle in after the Spherify. This should be the jiggle under object. It's got all these different settings. Let's hit play. Now, jiggle could be a little subtle sometimes, so I tend to go pretty extreme on the settings. We can definitely feel like this overall, there's a bigger kind of wiggle happening now, which could be good. But keep in mind, the further it moves away from the original mesh, the more it's not going to match. If the points get too far away from it, it's not going to match. So you got to maybe use a light touch on that. But we can, if you want to, you get rid of all the stiffness, and this should really wiggle. Get rid of the drag, and it's going to have a lot more. It's going to live for longer. It's going to move and wiggle and wiggle and wiggle. And then you can start pulling on structural. You got to be careful. Oh, and you also probably want to leave a little bit of stiffness. Otherwise, they'll start rotating. But pulling down structural, these will start wobbling crazy style. That's the dangerous one where it's really going to be deforming the mesh. But if we leave up the structural and put a relatively low stiffness on here, you can get some nice jiggly overlap. And hiding this one and going back to this geometry, hopefully we can see, ooh, yeah, look at that. Look at these extra, like, look how liquidy this is kind of feeling now. There's definitely, oh man, that that's looking better than I thought it would. So I'm going to leave that. Yeah, that is looking wonderful. Oh, I'm going to just save it right away because of how good that looks. Excellent. Now, okay, that's working awesomely. I'm very pleased with that. Keep in mind that you could also, I'm not going to do it. Well, I'll do it, but it's not going to look too good. You can also copy this jiggle deformer to happen after the plane. And even this is, let's call it plane deformer. So our plane deformer is calculating, but there's so many points that it's going to play, but it's probably going to play back with really low frame rate. But we can make these individual spikes also be getting some jiggle. But what I have found in my tests is that it kind of kills the spikiness of it. It makes it feel a lot more liquidy, but the spikes sort of go away. But that's not to say that there isn't some sort of combination of settings that wouldn't look cool. But for me, it takes a long time to calculate, and I don't think they necessarily look better. So running it on the low poly version is pretty powerful. And yeah, now we're getting these great looking spikes. I'm really digging that. And hopefully you see now all the different parts of the recipe. We can change the height of the spikes, the distance of these individual points, how much they're wiggling and returning, how long the trails are, how much time it takes for them. They can get these springy echoes from where they're going. And the best part is because we're using volume builders and volume meshers, we can put this on any geometry and it's all very evenly spaced. And look how like clean this looks. So I super duper dig that. Now, that essentially wraps up the meat of this. I just wanted to show a couple of extra details in case you're limiting yourself to thinking of this as like, oh, like these big like, volume meshed pieces of geometry or text. But this is currently on this piece of text, yes, but these don't have to be similar objects. So case in point, I'm going to make a plane, make it flat, and you see it's actually flat right on the surface because the text extruded backward. We need lots of geometry on here. I don't know how much. Let's say 111. That's not enough. So let's say 222, 222. Essentially, I want it to be similar-ish to what we have here, which is actually probably going to be closer to 333. So there we go. That's a decent amount of geometry there. So currently, everything is happening to our final geometry. But what if we transferred that to the plane and transfer that to the plane? Let's hide the final geometry and hit NB. And A, so we see it smooth. And now this plane is getting all that same information that we were getting from our spike, our spike reference. So the same text is transferring through, but on this flat plane. The Vertex map doesn't care what piece of geometry it's feeding onto. It's just transferring from one to the other. So you can see how we can transform a particular shape onto this. And currently it's bulging based on that sphere. Based on this fall off coming through. But I wonder if a better way of doing that, now that I think about it, you see how this is bulging there. But if we didn't want to be doing it that way, this is dangerous because it's untested. But that is coming through via spike height. But what if we hide spike height and I just drag in a second copy of the same vertex map? And the same vertex map is currently looking for nearest. Actually, let's move it up to the top so it's overriding everything. It should be overriding everything. Let's see. I'm not sure that, well, I'm going to temporarily turn off everything just to make sure that that's what is indeed working. And yes, it does seem to be. So this vertex map is coming through on nearest. But if I said actually average what's coming in, and we want to blur it so it becomes spiky, but we want it to blur. Yeah, we want it to blur enough so that we don't get too much of the individual spikes anymore. So now we get this bulge coming from it, but it doesn't look like a sphere specifically. So if that becomes an add, instead of adding the sphere, we just add that vertex map on top of the spikes. We should get the spikes and that little bit of bulge around it as well. So, we might be able to get the best of both worlds, do different, we can do some remapping. Right now it's coming through pretty harshly, but we could put it on a curve. And yeah, ooh, there we go. Yeah, so now this is smoothly transitioning in, and you can see that little bit of pull. If I pull this up more, we might be able to see it more clearly. Yeah, just get that extra layer of that pulling out. And then add the delay back in, add the decay. Keep in mind this delay and decay only work if you make this mesh editable. So if I make that editable, then now we should be able to get that echo and decay on there. So now you can see this text fade in. It really feels liquidy now. And all we did was transfer this to the plane. We transferred this to a completely unrelated piece of geometry. So it really opens up the possibilities of where that can go. And just as a quick final example, I'm not going to make it, but keep in mind, I can make this, I can drag in a logo. This is the Rocket Lasso logo brought in from Illustrator. And then just to show you, it's the same setup. Inside of, I have a vertex map. And what's really cool is you can drag in a spline. So I'll just do it here. Man, you're only going to drag in this spline. And it's going to look all super crazy when you first drag it in. But you can change this spline as it's dragged into a vertex map. We can change that to not be a curve, but be a mask. And now it's masking where that spline is, which is amazing right away. We have this fall off that we can increase or decrease, but very nicely, we can say it should be falling off on the inside. So now as I increase or decrease this, it's going to go from full power, well, 100% and 0. And as I increase it, we can actually get a little bit of a transition from there. So that becomes, we're transferring this to a vertex map. That then goes into a more complicated vertex map, which is essentially the vertex map multiplying on top of this linear field. That all transfers out of our reference mesh into the final geometry, just like we were just doing. So you see this, I'm gonna hit play, and now I can grab this linear field. Instead of the sphere, I can pull this through. And now as this transfers through, it's pulling out the spikes on this particular orientation, and you'll end up with the logo exposed as a series of awesome tiny little spikes there. One important thing to note is we threw a lot of geometry at this, but at any given point, you could also say, okay, that looks good, and I want it to calculate on the lower poly geometry, but you can create a subdivision surface, set it to 1,1, higher if you want, but drop that in there, and now it's going to smooth it out after all the calculations were done, and it will really round those out more. It's going to slow us down quite a bit because there is a lot of geometry and calculations going on in here, but that's the kind of thing that can happen during render time. And what's great about the subdivision surface is we can say in the editor, actually do 0. So it's not running in the editor, but it will run once you send it to the renderer. So yeah, nice combination there. Really easy to transfer. I think it's a really powerful way of layering everything up. And I did spend a lot of time jumping around and talking about layering vertex maps and making things maybe potentially more complicated than they need to be, because I want to give you all these different ingredients. But keep in mind, and even here, I'm going to jump it back into our final geometry because I do like this text. With it on this text, keep in mind that the core concept here is we're taking a lower poly object and transferring it to a higher poly object. And if we're looking at the radius of each point, then it creates a little spike. That's the core of the concept here. The rest of it is how do we move those points around to move the spikes around, and then how does it remember the spikes afterward? But I think as far as an artistic kind of ferrofluid overall look that we can do whatever we want with, I'm quite pleased with it. So I hope that was fun and interesting for you. I know I really like it. I just really love magnets and playing with magnets, and ferrofluid is just fascinating. I've tackled it a couple different times before, and this was the best version of it. It runs the quickest. It's applicable to the most different things. Now, I know we went a little extra complex on it. I know that there's a lot of different ingredients, as I said. I want to make it so you can make it the way you want to. You want to stylistically be able to art direct it and create exactly what you are going for, and not necessarily the super realistic version of it. So that's why I layered it up. Of course, the core concept here is just that you're taking a smaller number of points and projecting them onto a larger number of points, and every one of those smaller number of points becomes a little spike. And the end result there is really fun, and it layers up. Now, if you did find this useful and you want to support this type of content, you like these tutorials, and you like the stuff that I do, then you can support on Patreon. There's a link down below. It's really appreciated, but not necessary. These tutorials will always be free for everybody. In addition to getting scene files, including the scene files from this tutorial, you get bonus live streams. There's bonus live streams on Tuesday and Thursdays now, where people come and we try and go deeper and figure things out that we haven't figured out on other parts. People help me figure out where the tutorials are going to go. So it's really helpful along those lines as well, even for me. But I hope you would enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching. If you make something cool from this, I would love to see it. Put a link to it down below, or copy me on Twitter or on Instagram. Like I said, I love this magnetic stuff. If you make something cool, I would absolutely love to see it. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial or on the next live stream. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. I'm always having trouble framing. I'm not so good at framing myself, where it's like, should I be higher up in the frame, lower in the frame, behind the microphone?